Batman. The teaching of Batman is that each of us individually have the potential to be a Batman or a Batgirl or a Batwoman. That when you have no superpower, if you are willing to stand up for what's right, if you are willing to be the hero who is willing to make a commitment and persevere the way young Bruce Wayne did, that you can change the world and you can make your world a better place. Let's go back to young Bruce Wayne. He witnessed as a child his parents being murdered before his eyes on the city streets of Gotham. And at that moment in time, he sacrificed his childhood and made a vow. Young Bruce Wayne vowed that he was going to get the bad guy who did this. And he was going to get all the bad guys, even if he had to walk through hell for the rest of his life in order to accomplish this. And in honoring that vow and persevering, he became an urban warrior. He became the Dark Knight. That's inspirational on many levels. The fact that Batman is a symbol, that Batman and the superheroes represent something that we can all aspire to. We can all emulate that. We can all make commitments to good causes and good purposes and persevere against all odds to see it through. When I talk to friends of mine who grew up reading comic books, whether it was the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, one of the things virtually everybody agrees on is that in reading the adventures of our superheroes in comic books, that had a direct influence in the building of our own personal moral and ethical codes. The things Superman did and said, or Batman or Spider-Man, they really added to what we were learning from parents and teachers. And the importance of that should not be underestimated. I believe that today's comic book superheroes, which are today's movie superheroes and TV superheroes and animation superheroes and video game superheroes, are our modern day mythology. The ancient gods of Greece, Rome, Egypt, India still exist, except today they wear spandex and capes. Case in point, the Greeks called him Hermes, the Romans called him Mercury, and I call him the Flash. The Greeks called him Poseidon, the Romans called him Neptune, and I call him Aquaman. So I really believe that there is a global impact that these superheroes are having on us. But there's one thing that's been largely missing, and that is the fact that over the past 30 some odd years, Hollywood has been giving the world its American superheroes. Based on our culture, based on our short history compared to yours, you have thousands of years of mythology, of stories, of cultural characters and precepts. And the world needs your stories. The world needs your superheroes transposed, modernized, and brought to the global stage. And one of my hopes is that over the next number of years, we will be seeing superhero movies and streaming that represent cultures from every corner of the earth. I have been very fortunate. One of the great honors I've had is I have been able to speak 3 times now at the United Nations. And when I led a session at the United Nations, I sat in a room and was introduced to people from every country of the Middle East. And we all had our headphones on because we all spoke different languages and dialects. We all came from different geographical places. We all came from different cultures. We all came from different politics and we all worship different gods. Yet at that session, which has now been repeated 3 times, we all found a bond. We found a mutual bond that despite what too often the media and the politicians may be stressing about how different we all are, we found just how similar we all are in our mutual love of these great stories and great characters who inspire all of us from all our different cultures. And that was truly an amazing moment for me in my career, to be able to witness it, to be able to feel this. So I started out as a blue-collar kid, living an hour from New York City in the state of New Jersey. My father was a stonemason and my mother was a bookkeeper. I did not come from money. I did not have any relatives in Hollywood. I did not know anybody in Hollywood. But I knew at a young age, I wanted to write Batman comics. And beyond that, I wanted to show the world the true Batman, who was created in 1939 by Bill Finger and Bob Kane as a creature of the night, as a dark knight, stalking deeply disturbed criminals from the shadows. But how do you do that? How do you have dreams that big? How, as we say in America, do you jump over the Grand Canyon? How do you do that? And I had to find my own path. And it was a path of small steps that could lead me basically in one direction, look for any door that might be open just a crack, just a sliver, and quickly jam my foot in it and look for any opening that presented itself, or make my own opening. And the only way to do that is to get up off the couch. I have seen too often here in America and in other places around the world where I've lectured, 2 generations now of young people who, generally speaking, often believe they are entitled to something. They believe they are entitled to success. They're entitled to achievement, that the world owes them something, that the world is going to come to them. And it is categorically not true. It is the 15% that will get up off the couch, be proactive, and make their dreams come true who will succeed. Because what I've learned is if you do get up off the couch, you're one of 15%. Your competition is no longer 100% of everyone out there. Your competition is 15%, and your chance of success has just skyrocketed. So I was a comic book geek. I collected comic books. I read comic books. I went every Friday night. My dad would take me to an old flea market 12 miles from my house. And on Friday nights, the guy who owned a dilapidated backdate magazine stand would come in from New York with boxes and boxes and boxes of old comic books and would pour them out on a broken card table. And since they were so old, would sell them for 5 cents a piece. Normally back then, comic books sold for 10 or 12 cents a piece. That's where I began to amass my collection, dating back to 1936. So that by the time I graduated high school at age 18, I had over 30,000 comic books that took up my parents' entire garage. From the day we moved into our house, my dad never once was able to get his car into the garage. But my parents were great. They sacrificed everything for my brother and me. They listened to and tried to understand the geekiness of their strange little son and accommodate him. My mom sat down and read comic books and said, "There's nothing wrong with these. I think they spark your imagination and your vocabulary. And if you keep them neat and you promise me you're going to read other things like books and magazines and newspapers, you may keep your collection." And that, folks, was the greatest deal I have ever made in my life. I was at the first comic book convention ever held on the planet Earth. It was in a rundown hotel downtown New York in the mid 1960s. I was 13. There were 200 of us at that first big Comic Con. And shockingly, out of the 200, there were even 3 girls. Back then, reading comic books was quite subversive and not something you would expect a girl to do. The fact that today comic book movies are considered date movies is one of the greatest accomplishments, I think, of my lifetime. But I want to take you now to a cold night in the winter of 1966, January 1966. It was a night I had been waiting for months and months. I was so excited. The Batman TV series was going to debut that night. I was in my downstairs den. The anticipation was tremendous. The show came on the air, and 20 minutes in, I realized that this is a comedy. Oh my God, they're making a joke out of Batman. Oh my God, the whole world is laughing at Batman. And that just killed me as a hardcore Batman fan who had already met the creators of Batman, Bill Finger and Bob Kane. Well, that night in our downstairs den, I made a vow. Just like young Bruce Wayne once made a vow. But he made his vow over the slaughtered, murdered bodies of his parents in the street. My parents were safe upstairs in the kitchen, so it was a little different. But I vowed that somehow, some way, someday, I would find a way to show the world the true Batman, the one created as a creature of the night, and would attempt to remove from the collective consciousness of the world culture these 3 new words popping out of my TV screen: pow, zap, and wham. That was my vow. But how do you jump the Grand Canyon? My first opportunity came when I was in college, Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana. I was a junior. It was the early 1970s. The College of Arts and Sciences had started an experimental curriculum department. And the concept was that if you had an idea for a course that had never been taught before, and it didn't matter if you were a professor or an undergrad student, if you could get the backing of a department on campus, you then had the right to appear before a panel of deans and professors and pitch your course. If you were approved, you could teach that course for 3 hours of credit on campus. I saw this as an opportunity. I saw this as that door being opened just a half an inch, and I needed to put my foot into that. So nobody had ever created or taught an accredited college course on comic books. It was unheard of. So I wrote up a syllabus: comic book superheroes as our modern day mythology, comic books as a legitimate art form. And I went to the folklore department and spoke to my folklore professor. And I made my point. And he said, you know, Michael, you're right. We're dealing with superheroes who have the same plots, motifs, that are the same conventional stock characters that we find throughout mythology, whether we call them Beowulf, Ulysses. It is about the brave heroes battling the demons and dragons of their day. He said, and it really doesn't matter if we call them King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, or the Avengers, or the Justice League. It's all still the same, and I will back you. Armed with that, I took my pile of Batman and Superman comics, and I went in front of the dean and the panel of professors. As I walked in, the dean took one look at me and said, so you're the fellow who wants to teach a course on funny books at my university? I knew I was in deep trouble. I began the first pitch of my career. He let me speak for maybe 2 minutes and then cut me off. He said, Mr. USLAN, stop. Come on, he said. I read comic books when I was a little boy. I read every issue of Superman I could get my hands on. But all comic books are cheap entertainment for little children, nothing more, nothing less. and I reject your theory. This was a life-changing moment for me because I could have bowed my head, picked up my funny books, and turned around and walked out of the room, and that would have been the end of it. But figuring I had nothing left to lose, I decided to stand my ground. I said to the dean, "May I ask you 2 questions?" He said, "Ask me anything you'd like." I said, "Dean, are you familiar with the story of Moses?" And he looked at me as if I was crazy. He said, "Yeah, so?" I said, "So Dean, could you very, very briefly summarize for me the story of Moses?" And he sat back in his chair, arms folded, and said, "Mr. USLAN, I don't know what game you're playing here, but I will play this with you. The Hebrew people were being persecuted and their firstborn were being slain. A Hebrew couple placed their infant son into a little wicker basket and sent him down the river Nile. There he's discovered by an Egyptian family who raised him as their own son. When he grows up and learns of his true heritage, he becomes a great hero to his people." But I said, "Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much." Dean, you said before when you were a kid, you read Superman comics. By any chance, do you remember the origin of Superman? He said, "Of course, the planet Krypton was about to blow up. A scientist and his wife placed their infant son in a little rocket ship and send him to Earth. There he's discovered by the Kents, who raise him as their own son. When he grows up, and then he stops, stares at me for what I swear to you is an eternity, and says, 'Your course is accredited.' I am now the world's first college professor of comic books. I can't believe I pulled it off. I go back to my apartment. I'm elated. I call my mom back in New Jersey to tell her what happened. And she said to me, 'Michael, this is great. This is wonderful. But you can have the greatest creative wares, and if nobody knows of them, then you won't go anywhere with it. You need to let everybody know about your work.' I said, 'Ma, I'm in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm not even 20 years old. I have no money. How am I supposed to do that?' She said, 'You're a smart boy. You'll think of something.' So once again, figuring I had absolutely nothing to lose, I picked up a telephone and I called United Press International, asked to speak to a reporter, and then began screaming at the man. I said, 'What's wrong with you? You're not doing your job. This is outrageous.' He said, 'Calm down, sir. What are you talking about?' I said, 'What am I talking about? Are you kidding me? I heard there's a course on comic books being taught at Indiana University. As a taxpayer in this state, are you telling me that they're using my money to teach our kids comic books? This must be some communist plot to subvert the youth of America.' And I slammed down the phone. 3 days later, who shows up at my door but a reporter from United Press International with a photographer? The article they did was 1/3 of a page long, and it was picked up by virtually every newspaper in North America and a bunch in Europe. My phone started ringing and never stopped. I was invited on radio and TV talk shows. Every single class I taught was filled with reporters and television cameras. And maybe 2 weeks later, I got 2 life-changing phone calls. The first one was from, the voice was an exuberant male voice. "Hi, is this Mike USLAN?" "Yeah." "Hiya, Mike, this is Stan Lee from Marvel Comics in New York City." I call this my burning bush moment. I was talking to my God. He said, "Mike, everywhere I look, I'm seeing you on TV. I'm reading about you in newspapers. What you're doing is great for the entire comic book industry. How can I help you?" At that moment, Stan Lee, the co-creator of the entire pantheon of Marvel superheroes, became not just my idol, but my mentor and my friend. 2 hours later, the phone rang. It was the vice president of DC Comics in New York. He said to me, "We've been listening to you on the radio, reading about you in magazines. You're a very innovative young man, and we'd like to fly you to New York City and discuss ways we could work together." And that led to a job at DC Comics. Comic book geek dream come true. And while I was working at DC Comics, I put my foot in the right door at the right moment when I saw it open. And I got my first crack at professionally writing a DC comic book. It was called The Shadow. And The Shadow was a character originally created in the 1930s who was the most primary influence on Bill Finger and Bob Kane in the creation of Batman. Well, a couple of weeks after I handed in my first ever comic book script for The Shadow, who comes walking down the hallway but the editor of Batman Comics, Julie Schwartz. And he looks at me and sneers. He goes, "Hey, kid, I read your Shadow script." I said, "You did?" He goes, "Yeah. It didn't stink." I said, "Well, gee, thanks so much. I really appreciate that." He said, "How'd you like to take a shot at writing Batman?" Oh my God, a dream I had since I was 8 years old came true. I started writing Batman comics. I still get the chills. When my first issue came out, amid the tears, admittedly the tears, I panicked because I realized I no longer had a dream and I needed a new dream. And it took 10 minutes for the epiphany to hit. I remembered back to that cold night in January 1966 and the vow I made. And I realized my job, my mission at that moment was to make dark and serious Batman movies and show the world the real Bob Kane and Bill Finger version of Batman. So I went to the man who had mentored me into the comic book business at DC Comics, who was now the president. And I told him what I wanted to do. I said, "I want to buy the rights to Batman. I want to make these dark and serious Batman movies." He said, "Michael, for God's sake, don't do this. I care about you, kid. I don't want to see you lose all your money. Don't you understand that since the Batman TV show went off the air, the brand is as dead as a dodo. Nobody's interested in Batman anymore." I said, "But nobody's ever seen a dark and serious comic book superhero movie. This is going to be like a new form of entertainment." He said, "Is there any way I can talk you out of this?" I said, "No." He said, "All right, come on in." It took 6 months to negotiate that deal. That gave me time to find the greatest partner I could ever want. He was my dad's age, a legend in the movie business, Benjamin Melniker. And it gave us time to raise money privately. On October 3rd, 1979, we signed the paperwork. We bought the rights to Batman from DC Comics and set out to make my vision of dark and serious Batman movies. I thought it would be a slam dunk. Instead, I was turned down by every single studio in Hollywood. I was told I was crazy, that it was the worst idea they ever heard. They said, "Michael, you're out of your mind. You can't do dark superheroes. You can't do serious comic book films. You can't make a movie out of an old TV series. That's never been done." Turned down by everyone. Majors, the mini majors studios. As a result, from the time we bought the rights until we were finally able to get our first Batman movie made in 1989 with Tim Burton, Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, it took 10 years. 10 years. It was a human endurance contest. But my dream came true. It had so much to do with commitment and perseverance and passion. My mom always used to tell my brother and me that once you make a commitment, you honor that commitment. That's a matter of what we call integrity. And it's true that that can involve some pain. But you have to be prepared to endure some pain in order to persevere and honor commitments that you make. Well, the first movie came out in 1989, and not only was it a blockbuster at the box office, but more importantly, it was revolutionary. It changed Hollywood forever. It changed the comic book industry, and it changed the world culture's perception of comic books and superheroes and supervillains. That was an amazing moment. It opened up the door, that first Batman movie, to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because this young genius, Tim Burton, who was our director, who had a vision for how to do this, he had the big idea, what I call the big idea. He said, if we're going to do the first ever serious comic book superhero movie, this movie cannot be about Batman. This movie must be about Bruce Wayne. We have to show a Bruce Wayne so driven, so obsessed, to the point of being psychotic, that audiences will suspend their disbelief and say, oh yeah, that is a guy who would go out dressed as a bat and do what he does. The corollary to Tim's big idea was in world building. He said from the opening frames of the movie, Gotham City had to be the third most important character in the film. Because if audiences didn't immediately suspend their disbelief and believe in Gotham City, they could never then believe in a guy dressed as a bat fighting a guy who looked like the Joker. And he was absolutely right. Think about that. The movie was really about Bruce Wayne, not Batman. Isn't that the key to the Marvel Cinematic Universe? You've all seen the Iron Man movies. Shouldn't they really be entitled Tony Stark? Shouldn't the Spider-Man movies today be entitled Peter Parker? Tim Burton's impact and influence is felt today in every genre movie that comes out, as is the design work of my dear friend who's no longer with us, Anton Furst. Anton was the production designer on our first Batman movie. He designed Gotham City, the Batmobile, the whole look of the picture, and won the Oscar for it. Anton's design work influences every genre movie made, including this opening weekend. I could also argue Danny Elfman's musical score. His notes have influenced every composer working in the genre. So that's a legacy. And from there, the legacy was rebuilt, rebranded, reinvented by another genius director by the name of Christopher Nolan, who came in years later to restore the darkness and dignity to Batman, and in the process, elevating it. Because once you walk out of a Christopher Nolan Batman movie, you no longer have to simply say, gee, that was a great comic book movie. You could now say, that was a great film. The entire genre was reinvented yet again with two young geniuses by the name of Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who did the Lego movie and the Lego Batman movie, and then would go on to do Into the Spideyverse. It was reinvented again by Todd Phillips, another genius, in the movie Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. A complete new approach, a reinvention of what a comic book movie could be, period. It was reinvented again by Matt Reeves in the recent movie, The Batman, focusing on a young Batman who was still evolving, but who was the world's greatest detective. And I have a hunch, a strong hunch, it will be reinvented and rebranded and reimagined yet again with Joker 2, period. End of story. So this is the legacy. I am so proud and happy that Batman has been preserved for new generations. Along the way, people like Bill Finger and Bob Kane and Jerry Robinson and so many other writers and artists and editors and publishers envisioned him to be. My partner Ben used to call me Batman's Batman, because I fought at every moment I possibly could to keep him from becoming a campy, laughable, jokey figure again, and trying to preserve the darkness and dignity of Batman. Ben used to say, you're his protector, you're his defender. You are Batman's Batman. And in fact, that is the name of my latest book that came out in March. It's called Batman's Batman. It's a memoir. It's the sequel to my original memoir. It's called The Boy Who Loved Batman. It tells the story I've pretty much told you today. And I'm pleased to announce, before we go on to Q&A, that my story, The Boy Who Loved Batman, the book, is now being adapted as a Broadway play by the Niederlander organization in New York City. And I could not be more excited about the prospect. So with that, I thank you for allowing me this time to tell you my story. I look forward in the future to hearing back from many of you and hearing ultimately what your stories are and what paths you take in order to achieve your goals and to live your passions. Because if you incorporate your passion into your work, you never have a day of work. Gentlemen.
Thanks so much, Michael. In fact, Bat fans, and that's how Michael actually addresses people listening to him. It was a couple of months back in Delhi when he was visiting India with Nancy, when I heard this story, and I wasn't a Bat fan, but Michael is actually he can radicalize people. So I listened to the story and I went through his book, and you must also, guys, I have a copy of the book. So if you want the book, please start writing to me, get into the queue. There's already a queue. And we are waiting for the Broadway Dark Nights and Daydreams to take over. But, I have one question before because I don't want to come in between the questions. And also, this was inimitable Michael. I didn't even have to introduce him. He just took off. And you know everything about him now. So, but one question, Michael, is that when I was growing up, Superman was the #1 superhero. Batman wasn't, probably was #2, #3. And when did this switch happen? And now in the Hall of Fame, in the Superhero Hall of Fame, Batman is the #1.
Yes, that is perhaps my greatest accomplishment for Batman. You are absolutely right. When we were all growing up, it was all about Superman. Far and away, Superman was #1, end of story. But over the years, the success of the Batman films, and again, let me credit the geniuses responsible for the success. Tim Burton, Bruce Timm on the animation, Christopher Nolan, Todd Phillips, Matt Reeves. Batman has fairly consistently given us some of the greatest stories in history of comic book superheroes and the humanity of comic book superheroes. Superman has, since the 80s, not fared as well in the media. And that's something that they are working to change, working hard to change. And I look forward to that upcoming. But the accomplishment since 1989 was that when the Comic-Con Museum in San Diego initiated a comic book Hall of Fame, that the first character inducted into it was not Superman, it was Batman. And that is so inconceivable, impossible, unimaginable. I was just in a state of total elation that had happened. And that to me was a validation of those 10 years that I had to put in till we got that first movie made, a validation of my mission and what I set out to do, and a further way to honor the creators of Batman, deservedly so. People like Bill Finger did not receive that kind of recognition or honor in their lifetimes. And now where their grandchildren and great-grandchildren can see this happening, I felt that's part of my personal responsibility, not just to the character, but to the creators.
Thanks. And I was also remembering you're talking about your parents and you're talking about Stan and others, but there was also this archivist in the library, the DC library where you're working, who used to open the library and you would go there and read all the comics. I mean, you must have read thousands of comics out there. I mean, what was the name of the archivist?
She was a tiny woman from Eastern Europe. She was a survivor of the Holocaust. Her name was Gerda Gattel. She was like everyone's ultimate grandma. And she had the keys to the DC archives when I was working there, the library. And she knew that not only was I passionate about comic books, but that I was teaching comic books for credit in college. So I was a comic book professor, that I saw myself as a comic book historian and wanted to know everything and get all the answers straight from the horse's mouths and meet all the creators and everyone who was around in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So she saw that in me and gave me the okay. And many, many days during lunch hour, rather than go out to lunch, she would lock me into the DC library, which was like a vault. And she would bring down volumes of comic books that I could read, starting with their first comic books from 1935. And ultimately, over the about 3 years that I worked summers at DC, I had an opportunity to read every DC comic book between the mid 30s and the mid 50s when I started reading and collecting. And I kind of completed my DC journey, my knowledge journey, thanks to this wonderful, sweet, and kind lady, Gerda Gattel.
Ram, my colleague out there who teaches radio and TV and is a Bat fan. So Ram, your question. And then Kajori, who teaches a course actually similar to what you taught at the school out here. So after Ram, Kajori. Ram, shoot. And students, please switch on your cameras if you want to ask your questions.
Thank you, Kish. So I can imagine the palpable sense of relief there must have been, Michael, when you hawked the Batman idea across studios and no one accepted it. And after 10 years, you finally got Tim Burton to make the dark Batman that you were wanting to make. But let's talk a little bit about the arc after that. I mean, Tim Burton goes on to make Batman Returns, and then after that, you have Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin, which slides back into some of the campiness, I think, of the Adam West serial, didn't it? Because it became the butt of several jokes, and in some ways, it lost the seriousness that Tim Burton had brought to the entire story. So, tell us a little bit about that. How did that feel as a Bat fan, as a Bat freak, as a Bat passionate person? What was the Joel Schumacher movie about, and how did it feel when that came out and became the butt of so many, well, not memes at that point, but jokes?
That is a great question. And let me start by saying the following. I have never met a nicer, kinder, warmer person than Joel Schumacher. This man was a wonderful human being who is loaded with talent. And I think far too often he gets saddled with the blame for the movies that came out in that period of time. As he used to tell me, they had brought him in because there was a movement at that time within the studio where they were falling in love with licensing, merchandising, and Happy Meals. And they wanted to be as cooperative as possible with the toy companies and the licensees. So they told Joel that they wanted movies that were lighter, brighter, kiddie-friendly, family-friendly, that the toy companies would love it if there were as many as 3 or more heroes in a movie, 3 or more villains in a movie. That would be just great. They would love to see 2 costume changes and 2 vehicles per character. And my response was, I think the tail's wagging the dog here. And that if you follow that, it crowds out such things as plot and character development. And maybe the best path is to find the filmmakers with the most passion about the characters, who know and understand the character, have a vision for it, and then let them execute the vision and just make great movies. And if you make great movies, you'll still sell toys. That was not the way things went. For me personally, at the time, moving from Batman Forever into Batman and Robin and Catwoman was probably the lowest point of my career. And I think you'd have to call me despondent at that point in time. And it was my second father, Ben Melniker, who sat me down and said, Michael, if everything you're saying is true, then they're going to get bitten on this. And if they get bitten, next time around, they're going to want to do it the way that you've envisioned it. That was not very comforting for me at the time. However, that's pretty much what happened. And when I look back now and think that going through that degree of pain and suffering, for me as the hardcore dark Batman fan, that it was well worth it, because that is what led us to Christopher Nolan. And the fact that the later management at the studio were willing to turn the keys to their most valuable franchise over to a young independent filmmaker who had the passion, the love, the understanding, the knowledge, and the vision for the character was absolutely incredible. It was a gutsy move to make, and there's no looking back.
Sorry,
Okay, I think
unmuted. Yeah, Kajori, shoot. We don't have a lot of time left, guys, so you got to keep your questions short and raise your hands. I already have 4 or 5 hands, so good. I think we'll have time only for these. Kajori, you go first.
Thank you, Kishalay, and thank you, Michael. Thank you for so much of my childhood. But my introduction to Batman as a kid growing up in the 90s was through Batman the Animated Series. And I think one of my favorite things about it, because obviously the format allowed for so much experimentation, was Batman as the greatest detective. And when I went back to the comic books, that was always what drew me. And when I saw the original movies, there was an element of that, but it's interesting to me that we waited till 2022 to really play up that element of Batman. Why do you think that that aspect of Batman is something that took 40 plus years of Batman legacy to make it on film?
I went back into my old files recently, and I found that the first time I brought up to the studio that we need to make a movie showing Batman as the world's greatest detective, that occurred in late 1989. So I've been waiting 33 years to get a Batman movie focused on that. And I can tell you right now, thanks to Matt Reeves, it was worth the wait. I mean, if I went back in time 33 years and could speak to myself, I would say, hang in there. It's going to be worth a 33-year wait. I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have thrown myself through a window. I don't know. But it was. I mean, it really was. And I think part of it has been the concentration within the Hollywood structure on big, blockbuster, special effects. I think it was about bigness. So much was about the gimmicks and the tech and the cars and the explosions. And the fact that we had great filmmakers who were able to give us character development and character arcs and plot and subplots within the context of still delivering a big movie is a testament to the filmmakers who came along. But I think finally allowing Matt Reeves to execute that and executed so utterly brilliantly, where just before it opened, people said to me, well, what Batman movie is the cinema precedent for the Batman? I said, it's not a superhero movie that's the cinema precedent. It's Silence of the Lambs, Zodiac, The Usual Suspects, Seven, French Connection, A Taxi Driver. I mean, there's just so much to it. I couldn't be more thrilled and have to report it's worth the wait. Let me just add, on Batman the Animated Series, those folks do not get enough of the spotlight. And when you talk about it, you talk about Bruce Timm, Alan Burnett, Paul Dini, Andrea Romano, Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, who to me remains the definitive voice of Joker. These people deserve an incredible amount of credit for what they've done. And I think some of the greatest Batman stories ever told in the media, you will find in Batman Mask of the Phantasm. You will find it in the two-parter that they did with Mr. Freeze that just wanted to tear your heart out. We could go on and pick out episodes that delivered on that, but that was magnificent. That was absolutely magnificent. So a tip of the hat to those folks, and thank you for bringing that up.
Agastya, quick question from you.
Yes, my question is, so Batman media has been around for about 80 plus years, and there has been a variety of tones used for this character, right? So we can go from comics like Batman Night Cries, Batman Venom, and Batman the Killing Joke to like the Adam West TV show and Batman Beyond. So I think my question is, for any new writers, it can be a bit of a daunting task to like just see this and like be like, how can you balance these tones? Or do you commit to one side, or do you just leave out the rest? So how do you balance these tones, or do you just commit? What would be the best way to approach Batman in that sense?
First part of the question, I have to say, reflects the comic books. Over the decades, the comic books themselves have featured Batman from one extreme to another extreme. We have seen Batman is dark, almost vampiric, darkly romantic. We have seen Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. We've seen Batman in his 50s, bitter, frustrated. We've seen a young Batman emerging from Batman Year One. We've seen the Killing Joke with a completely different side of Joker than the Clown Prince of Crime, which was the one I was introduced to when I was growing up reading comic books. I grew up in an era where I had to deal with Bat Genie, Bat Mite, Bat Robot, Super Batman. Oh my God. So the comic book set the stage for all of this. It is my belief that when cinema is at its best, it serves as a mirror to society. It holds it up, and we have to look at ourselves, warts and all. And if you go back and look at the different time frames in which the filmmakers brought Batman to the screen, it actually does that. With Christopher Nolan, it was in the aftermath of 9/11, when the world had changed. In Tim Burton's time, we were living in a black and white world of good versus evil. And now in Chris Nolan's time, we're living in a gray world of order versus chaos. And it reflects that. When Todd Phillips did Joker, it was a reflection on where our society was at that moment in time, dealing with our shocking loss of civility, the way we all talk at each other instead of with each other now, our general disregard of mental health issues, which are directly tied into gun violence. And that's what I think cinema is at its best. So to me, you listen to filmmakers who have a vision. And I consider myself the number one cheerleader. That's my role now for Batman and for the filmmakers. I'm the number one cheerleader. And you want to support the filmmaker, whoever it is, in her or his vision, in the execution of it. And I think that's the way it has to be. Batman is ever changing over 80 years. He's malleable. He's us, and we change. And he's going to reflect that, because at the end of the day, it's not just the fact that he's human, it's the fact that he's a symbol. And different times require different symbols.
Thanks. I mean, Michael actually is the person who shaped the way we see Batman or saw Batman over the decades. But, I'll come back to those ones who raised your hands. Please bear with me because I'm going to the classroom. Michael, actually, a lot of students are sitting together because they wanted to watch, listen to you sitting together. So I'm going to ask Shravani if there are any questions, Shravani, from the class out there, from the auditorium. Shravani, can you hear me? Are there any questions?
Professor, can you hear me?
Louder.
Professor, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a few questions from the students here, so I'll just give it to them.
Yeah. Quick. Go ahead.
Yes, Professor?
Yeah. Go ahead, I said. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Ask the question. Go ahead.
Okay. I just had a question about, since Marvel and Marvel, etc., were thinking of, like, they show a lot more brown representation in their movies. I was just thinking if DC is going to possibly show more South Asian representation in their movies. It's just a question I had.
Right. Well, while I certainly can't speak for the studio or DC Comics whatsoever, the world is changing and our perceptions are changing for the better. And I think generally speaking, when you are talking about Hollywood, I think there has been an acknowledgement and an awakening about that. And I think you're going to see that. Certainly, I know DC's got Blue Beetle coming up momentarily. I think you're going to see that quite extensively in the years to come, happily.
Thanks. Are there any other questions out there, Shravani? Otherwise, I'll ask Gopalakrishnan to shoot. Gopalakrishnan, why didn't you ask your question?
Yes, good morning, sir. I just have one quick question. It's really short, but I guess you have thought about this a lot. So, which Batman is your personal favorite?
So my feeling is the following. Each one of us, our one true Batman is probably the Batman we were each introduced to first, whether we were 5 years old, 10 years old, 15, 20, and whether it came from a comic book, a cartoon, a movie, or a video game. That for each of us becomes our one true Batman, but it allows a lot of room to grow and maneuver. So my true Batman, I go back to what Bill Finger and Bob Kane created. You look at the early Batman issues, Detective Comics, where Batman operated solo, and then the introduction of Robin, and then the introduction of Joker and Catwoman and Batman #1, and expanding out what became the greatest rogues gallery in the history of comic books. That all adds up for me to be the Batman I know and love as a kid. Then as I grew older, comic books were also growing more mature. They were developing more and more sophisticated graphic storytelling techniques and gave us The Dark Knight Returns and The Killing Joke and Batman Year One. We had back in the 1970s this great run by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams involving Raj Al Ghul and his daughter Talia, and Man-Bat, which was a very emotional story about a love story between a man and his wife that was tragic. We had the Steve Englehart, Marshall Rogers issues of Batman that recreated him as a darkly romantic figure. So, all of these in different stages of my life become my Batman, my vision of Batman. And I'm happy to say that that's reflected in the movies as well.
Thanks, Mike. Ankit, you go.
Professor Stein, I just wanted to thank you for this. And in fact, my area of interest is international law. And actually, there is an issue by Superman, wherein Superman actually grabs Hitler and Stalin and takes them to the World Court in The Hague, where I was just interning. I just wanted to offer a reflection which I found interesting, and in this paper which I've written, which I would like to share with you as well, is that the Jewish roots of all these authors and how academic freedom and also linguistic freedom and also literature, which allows them to share these ideas in a tone which inspires all of us, and the mythological undertones which are also which you also highlighted. And I think, would you feel that something like this would be publishable in the hyper textualized worlds that we live in today, especially seeing with what is happening with authors such as Salman Rushdie, who inspires us on a regular basis, but is now literally fighting for his life?
Well, that is a staggering question. And I think we have to look at the totality of our superhero culture. And yes, there are stories like the Moses story that was incorporated in Superman, the Golem story that was incorporated into the Hulk. But to me, in my own mind's eye, you have the Jesus story that was incorporated into Silver Surfer. And when you look at all the superheroes, there's no denying the influence of Greek, Roman, and Egypt mythology and culture in them. No, you can't possibly deny it. That was often the direct inspiration. I think the great thing about this is what I said earlier, and that is that we need writers and artists coming from different countries and different cultures to contribute to the superhero mythology globally, but based on their cultures and their perceptions and what works. And that is going to enhance it. That's going to make things, it's going to open all of us up to different kinds of superheroes whose motivations are going to be different. And I think the world's going to need it. There's only so far you can go with the American superheroes. You're going to need more than that. And I look forward to what writers from different cultures, religions, and backgrounds can bring to the table to do that.
Can I share this paper with you, sir?
Okay, Ankit, I will. You get in touch with me, Ankit. I'll pass it on to him. Okay. We have time for just one last question, and I think I'm just going to ask Ananya to go. I'm just randomly picking. Okay, please don't mind the others because we've already taken Michael's more than our hour's time out here, so we'll let him go after one question. Ananya.
Hello, Professor. I just have a quick question. So The Batman Begins came out in 2005, and I was born in 2005. I quite literally grew up watching movies, and I discovered comics after watching them. And recently, the poster for Oppenheimer came out, and I was wondering, how does it feel to work with a man no short of a legend like Christopher Nolan? And part two to that question is, what are your thoughts on Snyder's cut?
Christopher Nolan, who's one of the most creative and nicest people you would want to meet. His wife, Emma, one of the nicest people you would want to meet. One thing I remember best is Chris showed up every day on the set wearing a suit and tie. He brought the golden age of Hollywood to the set. It was so classic and classy. And that approach filters down through the whole crew. And it was quite a wonderful thing to be able to witness that. That was a very, very special time in my life. And I am privileged, when I think of the 7 or 8 geniuses now I've had a chance to meet and get to know. It's incredible over my 46-year career. It was absolutely wonderful. And, again, every filmmaker has their shot to do their vision. So Tim Burton had 2 pictures. Chris had 3 pictures. Scott had 2 pictures. Todd is doing Joker 2, so he'll have 2 pictures. Matt Reeves is working on Batman 2, so he'll have a couple of pictures. And I think it's a great thing to give different filmmakers an opportunity to present their vision to the world.
Thanks. And Joseph and Ahan and Ashi, Mahima, Naya, I'm sorry, because we got to stop somewhere. Otherwise, we just carry on. I mean, I think it's just going to be endless number of questions. So what we'll do, I can't promise you, but I'll promise that I'm going to try very hard to get Michael on campus so that you can actually ask the questions in person. We can then hold them hostage for longer in the same auditorium where you're sitting and asking. All right. And please go and read his books. They are also available in audiobook versions, I think, Michael, right? Your books are
Yes,
there.
correct.
So, and like I said, that I have one of the copy. You could borrow that from me. I think I'm probably the only one who hasn't watched Batman 2022. So I will go and watch. That's for me. I think everyone out here knows everything about Batman. And like I said, I'm the unlikeliest choice to have introduced you. But just because I met you a couple of months back, that's why I wanted you to share your story with the students out here and my colleagues. And I'm really, really grateful, Michael, that you agreed to spare so much time for OP Jindal University. And I hope that we will get to see you in person very soon.
I would very much look forward to that. My time in India was wonderful and precious. I look forward to getting back. Just the lure of the food alone could do the trick. But that would be great. I look forward to meeting you all in person, having an opportunity to sit down with you. And I thank you for today's forum. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Michael. The dinner's on me.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, guys. Thanks. Let's go back to the bat caves, as they say.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.